Okay. Are we ready, Di?
Yes.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to this evening's meeting, where, as you can see, I hope from your screen, that we're looking at the Royal Parks together. It's a forum organised jointly between the Hammond Petersham Forum, Neighbourhood Forum, and the North Kingston Neighbourhood Forum. My name is Simon Kington, as you can see from your screen, and I am the chair of the Hammond Petersham Neighbourhood Forum. And Diane Watling is the chair of the North Kingston Neighbourhood Forum, and she is the one who's in charge of muting and unmuting. And we are very grateful to her and to Councillor Andre Fries, who have set the evening up and made it happen, and who are managing the Q&A section afterwards. There are a large number of people attending tonight, and that's challenging to manage. So if I can just set out the sort of ground rules, the guidelines that we have. All your microphones will be switched off, except for the representatives of the Royal Parks, to enable them to do their presentation. But then if we come to a part later where we can have questions, then obviously at that point, Diane will switch your microphone on so you can ask it. However, we do have, as was requested, a very large number of pre-submitted questions. So it may be, unfortunately, that we use up our entire hour and a half with the presentation and then answering those. It may be that actually we get through them quite quickly, and so there is time for other questions to be asked as well. I will read out the pre-submitted questions, and I will put them in order, I'll group them together, because obviously on the sort of topics that are coming up, several people have asked a similar question, several questions about through traffic or about cycling, for example, and we'll put those together and then put them to the Parks team. Tonight's event is being recorded. So if you really don't want to be included in that recording, then make sure your video is off, as well as your sound. If you, while listening in the course of the evening, want to ask a particular question and flag that up for the follow-up, the possible follow-up later, then use the chat function, which is should be, I think on my computer, it's at the bottom of my screen. And don't type a whole question in, because then it'll just fill up and be overwhelming. Instead, write the topic. So question culling, for deer culling, for example, if you've got a question about that. And then we can, again, group those and see where they fit in and come back to those. The one other practicality is that sometimes, because of the bandwidth and the amount of bandwidth it takes up to use your camera as well as audio, if you have a problem, if we seem to be cracking up, you can't hear properly, try turning your video off. That's another way of saving bandwidth and making sure it's easier to hear, because generally the audio works better than the video. So I hope that was all clear. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I would like to welcome the representatives of the Royal Parks, and we are so grateful to them for giving up their time this evening and giving up their expertise to share with us. And so we welcome Tom Jarvis, who's the Director of Parks, Matt Bonamy, who's Head of Transport and Access, and Simon Richards, who is the Richmond Park Park Manager. And the evening will start with Tom, who's going to give us a presentation, as you can see from your screens, on the movement strategy. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Simon, and obviously thank you to yourself and Councillor Fries and Diane for your moderation of the meeting this evening and for setting it up. So hopefully, as you'll see as we move through the presentation and maybe the questions afterwards, consultation plays an important role in the Royal Parks journey to develop and implement a movement strategy for the parks. So it's really welcoming, therefore, to see so many people actively interested in this process and taking the time out of their evenings to attend this meeting this evening. As I said, this evening, from a Royal Parks point of view, I'm joined by Matt Bonamy, who's our Head of Transport, and Simon Richards, who some of you may well know, who is the Richmond Park Manager. And if there's a question that's specific to their areas of expertise, I may well delegate to them to answer those questions towards the end of the meeting. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to present TRP's recent work on the movement strategy and give some sort of detail about the direction that we're moving in and how we reach the current point that we're at the moment. So that's the movement strategy, and also some discussion around the announcements regarding parking charge consultation, which is underway at the moment. Okay, that slide. There we go. Right, sorry. I mean, firstly, as I said, I briefly wanted to explain the how we reached the position that we're at the moment in terms of the movement strategy for the Royal Parks. We started this process in 2019 when we publicly shared a sort of discussion paper that very clearly set out our vision for movement within, to, and through the parks. And as part of that discussion paper, we identified 7 guiding principles behind the vision that we had for this movement within the parks. And they were in sort of no particular order, that we will protect and conserve our park's special qualities, that our parks are places that people visit for relaxation and recreation, that we will encourage the use of more sustainable ways to access and travel through our parks, that our park roads are not intended to be primarily commuter through routes for motor vehicles, that we will achieve more by delivering key projects through collaboration and partnership, that we will make evidence-based decisions, and that we'll be proactive in our approach to future transport challenges and opportunities. And this document sort of, you know, as we said, was publicly shared. We received around 7,000 responses to this initial survey, the majority of which were overwhelmingly supportive for the principles, as you'll see as we move into sort of the next slide. So as we said, the results from this sort of first phase of engagement demonstrated a high level of support for these principles. 7,000 responses for a discussion document of this type is extremely positive. As we can see here on the slide, these figures are standardized across all of the parks. The individual reports for each of the parks around this discussion paper are available to download on our website. But these figures here are representative of the sort of comments and feelings felt and made by those individuals who responded. So as we can see, the support for the principles we outlined was high. These are primarily the first sort of 4 principles. 85% of respondents supported our continued protection of the park's special qualities. 79% supported promotion of active and sustainable travel. 74% supported the prioritisation of walking as a mode of transport within the parks. And 78% supported the reduction of through traffic and the impact that it has on the parks. I mean, it's clear, my role as director of the Royal Parks means I'm responsible for the 8 Royal Parks, but within a strategy such as this, it's clear that Richmond Park is one of our more complex parks in terms of movement. I mean, you'll all know it extremely well. It has multiple roadways, multiple gates, multiple stakeholders, and that was very much reflected in terms of the engagement we got around this discussion paper in the first instance, with around 3,000 of the 7,000 respondents being focused on Richmond Park. And again, I think that's one of the strengths of the community around Richmond Park, that they are a very engaged community of stakeholders, and they were willing to step forward and comment and consult, as they have done all the way through this process in terms of the direction and decisions that we're taking. So I'm just having to swap between 2 screens. So from this initial discussion paper and the responses that we received, we developed our final strategy document. Again, this was published for a sort of final public comment earlier on this year, and this was accompanied by a 1-year implementation plan. This implementation plan set out a series of trial projects that we would obviously trial across the 6 of the Royal Parks. These have been implemented this year, and this list of projects is within Bushy Park. We're removing all through traffic with a partial road closure between Teddington and Hampton Court gates. For the central parks in St James's and Green Park, this is closing the Mall and Constitution Hill to traffic on Saturdays until dusk, in line with the Sunday closures. And in Greenwich Park, this is a full-time closure of the avenue to cut through traffic. Whereas in Hyde, the trial closures relate to North Carriage Drive, permanently closed, and South Carriage Drive on a Saturday, again linking that closure of that carriageway with its existing Sunday closure. And of course, there was specific implementation around Richmond that I will come to and deal with slightly more detail in a minute. But each of these implementations is focused around, and this trial project is focused around the objectives and the principles that we outlined earlier on within this process. So it's useful just to sort of clarify, I think, what's meant by sort of a trial project, and that to our mind is a project that's put in place to implement changes to movement within the parks to enable us to assess the outcome of these changes, you know, whether positive or negative. Within that in mind, we see it with four distinct phases, very much the implementation phase, which we're currently in at the moment, the measuring and monitoring phase, which we're working through, the consultation phase, which comes in November, and then finally the decision phase, which is something that we will take to our board later, earlier on in the next year. So from this point of view, as I said, we began the trials officially at August this year with the implementation of the changes that relate to these individual projects. And again, it's important there to note that these trials are separate and should not be confused with the COVID-related interventions that we put in place earlier on in the year. Within Richmond Park, that was very much the closure of the entire park to traffic, which was implemented very much as a reaction to COVID, a reaction to the pressures the park was under, and was in line with measures taken by other organisations across the country in terms of that. So those were very much responding to specific COVID-related pressures, whereas the trial projects and the implementation of those here relate to the principles indicated in our movement strategy. So we're now measuring and monitoring the use of the park through the sort of implementation trial phase. This is through traffic counts, visitor observations and incident reporting. And this is also linked in with stakeholders and local boroughs around in terms of impact of these trials across the sort of wider environment. We will move to public consultation phase in November, and that is very much the point where we're very keen to see response from individuals in relation to this process. And you know, it's very positive to see the range and breadth of questions that we've got relating to this. And again, very much the time to raise those issues as well is very much in that consultation process. Once we've proceeded through the consultation process in November, the Royal Parks will be providing a recommendation to the Royal Parks Board, who will be the final board of trustees, which is the final decision-making group in relation to that. And the recommendation would be to either make permanent, revoke, amend, or extend the trials that we have implemented across the parks. So if we talk slightly more sort of in detail now about the Richmond Park trial, which I know is particularly the one of interest to yourselves. Along with all our trials, the Richmond Park trial seeks very much to achieve the following three objectives: to create new space for visitors, to reduce cut-through traffic, and to protect the park environment. As you'll see here, you know, that's an information fact sheet that was produced specifically for this trial. That's downloadable on our website, as are all the fact sheets for each of the trials across all of the parks. But again, you know, as we mentioned earlier, you know, Richmond Park is a very complex environment in terms of that for movement, large number of different movement groups or users moving through the park in different ways. So from that point of view, it's a trial that sort of is quite complex and challenging in that instance. So over the next sort of few slides, I'll go through some of the details of how we translated these objectives into the implementations on the ground that we currently have as trial to try and deliver the aims that we're seeking in relation to the objectives indicated there. So the first intervention that that is in trial at the moment is the closure of the section between Robin Hood Gate car park and Broomfield Hill car park. So this is effectively restricting all cut-through traffic on the eastern side of the park while still allowing access to the car parks within the parks. Primarily, as we've spoken before, you know, the focus in this is about permitting access to the park and the car parks for visitors, but trying to reduce that movement of commuter traffic and through vehicle traffic through the park, which can have such a detrimental impact on the enjoyment of the park for our visitors. So by closing this link between Broomfield Hill Car Park and Robin Hood Gate, we're able to remove all cut-through traffic on the eastern side of the park. And this is a 7-day intervention. So this is an intervention that runs through from Monday to Sunday. And primarily this means that, if you want to access Broomfield Hill Car Park, access is via Kingston Gate, whereas Robin Hood, you're coming in from Roehampton. So that link between those two gates, or those gates there on that side, is taken out, breaking that route through for commuters or for through traffic. So the second intervention related to the closure of the link between Sheen Gate and Sheen Cross. And again, a intervention primarily designed to reduce or limit or curtail cut-through traffic running through the park and East Sheen through Sheen Gate, primarily during the morning rush hour, which was the period that we saw one of the highest volumes of bypassing traffic through the park on this particular route. Again, this intervention is a 7-day-a-week intervention and removes a significant amount of non-park visitor traffic from the park, while creating a safe space for families and children to enjoy and walk and cycle on Sheen Lane. So again, creating that space for the public to enjoy as a consequence of that removal of through traffic. And then finally, there was intervention C, which is a weekend only intervention and is a full weekend closure of the link between Richmond and Roehampton gates. Rationale behind this on that we have significantly more visitors at the weekend. So with that in mind, the detrimental impact of vehicles is significantly greater to visitors at the weekend because there are more visitors within the park, and the improvement in terms of the park experience is significantly greater. There are no car parks accessed by this road, and it's been embraced by a large number of visitors who use this car-free section of the park over the weekend for a whole host of different sort of movement activities. I mean, these 3 interventions are, a really exciting step to realising our objectives to cut through traffic and improving the quality of the park for our visitors. I mean, as it stands at the weekend at the moment, we have a park that is effectively 2/3 closed to through traffic, which realistically, I personally feel is a significant step forward in terms of managing the impact of traffic on Richmond Park. But I know there are some specific questions about that we can deal with when we come to the question section later on. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the sort of monitoring phase at the moment. And as it says there, the Royal Parks, we're partnering with local authorities to measure and monitor the impacts of traffic reassignment inside and outside the park. Because I mean, we're very aware that anything from a transport world, any change or alteration to movement has implications far beyond where you might immediately see it. Likewise as well, there may well be benefits further beyond that as well. But and again, as we said, consultation is very important to us within this process, and we welcome public and stakeholder feedback during the formal consultation phase, which starts in mid-November. This consultation will be advertised online and through many of our partner organisations, such as this one here, local borough, friends groups, etc. I mean, it will consist of a formal survey that will be available to complete online and will run from mid-November through until the end of December. We have had, and just raising this point here, a number of questions during the trial period from individuals and groups about why we can't make changes during the trial period, why we can't finesse and change things at that point. And I think that the need during the trial period is to be consistent in terms of how the trial is implemented, to ensure the accuracy of the data collected by both the parks and the boroughs. If we change and flex the implementation projects halfway through, then realistically that impacts on the accuracy of the data that we're collecting. And it's that data that will be used to make those evidence-based decisions alongside the consultation in terms of the future of the project. So had a wide range of views so far, with many visitors suggesting we should close more roads, and equally as held many others suggesting that road closures are causing issues. So again, you know, there is no desire by the Royal Parks to curtail or limit any consultation in terms of that. We are genuinely open to all consultation, and we would genuinely encourage you all to submit your views in relation to this as part of that consultation phase when it begins in mid-November. So moving away from the movement strategy to the introduction of parking charges. So this year, the Royal Parks has started the process of exploring the introduction of parking charges. This is a process that requires a change to park regulations, and as such requires public consultation prior to any acceptance or change to those regulations and introduction of these charges. So we're now into the last weeks of the parking charge consultation, which has been running for a number of weeks now. And again, we're very keen to receive feedback in relation to consultation from the public and from yourselves as stakeholders in relation to your views around car parking charges. Our proposed scheme, as you can see there, is sort of indicated on the screen. The proposal is to charge in all car parks across the Royal Parks. At the moment, there's charging within the Central Parks and Greenwich Park for car parks, but Richmond and Bushey are the two where we don't currently charge. So charging would be consistent across all of the Royal Parks. We would limit the stay to a maximum of 6 hours. Charges would apply from 9 AM to 6 PM, and that period only, Monday to Sunday, no matter what time the park opens or closes. So in the summer months where it's lighter and you're able to access the park significantly earlier, parking charges would not commence until 9 and would only run till 6. And again, that's consistent with our position across the other Royal Parks. And of course, blue badge holders would remain exempt from any charges, as is very much the position elsewhere in the country. So in proposing to implement these changes, sort of for the following primary reasons: to help manage the demand for car parking across the parks. We've all seen that the car parks in Richmond and Bushey are oversubscribed. They're often full. I know the last weekend we saw significant queues of vehicles trying to access already full car parks. So in that respect, you know, car park charging is a mechanism to manage demand. We're also keen to encourage sustainable transport options, where alternative options where they're appropriate for visitors who wish to come to the parks. And equally as well, they are a source to raise revenue towards the maintenance and upkeep of park-related infrastructure. That's infrastructure related to transport-related projects and transport-related infrastructure within the parks. So as I said again, their consultation for car parking closes on the 1st of November 2020. The online questionnaire is open until that date for consultation and comment. And likewise as well, we are also equally happy to take email submissions via the consultation email address that you will see there. And as again, if I can just reinforce that from the Royal Park's point of view, consultation is incredibly important in both of these processes, and we are keen to understand and receive feedback from the local community and stakeholders in relation to both our movement strategy and our car parking charges. Now, I know, Simon, if we're happy to move back to questions, I know some of the queries that maybe have been asked by individuals may encompass some of the queries that the rest of the group have. So perfectly happy at this point to move forward to the more formal question section of the meeting, if that's fine. I will go off share screen as well.
Great, thank you very much.
If I can. There you go, stop share. I should have seen there's a big red button at the top there. Yeah.
That's it, yeah. So thank you. I don't know if you've noticed, it's hard to talk and read and move slides at the same time, but various people have been chipping in various comments as we've been going on. What I will do, as promised, is start by reading out the questions that have been submitted in advance, and you'll see some of those you've started to address. Some undoubtedly chime in with things people have been commenting as well. So can I just check, Matt? Have you been highlighting for me to ask those in order? Is that your thinking?
Yeah, just start with the green ones. I'm trying to put them
great.
into a
That's
few
what I thought.
themes.
Thank you very much. So, Reese Pullen asks, with both RBK and Richmond Council having declared a climate emergency, we'll all need to be doing more to promote active travel. It's arguable the proposals aren't ambitious enough, and perhaps the removal of all through traffic or road charging should have been trialled. Will stronger measures be considered in the future, and why were they not pursued now?
I mean, in answer to that question, I mean, the Royal Parks, have also declared a climate emergency and are looking very much at the promotion of active and sustainable travel, which is a key principle both within our movement strategy. The charges implemented through parking within the park will be a first step in terms of managing that demand. I think when we reflect on the traffic conditions in 2019 compared to the trial, we are moving relatively quickly in terms of what we're looking to implement. We have also sort of explored the opportunities around road user charging within the parks, and there are certain restrictions within how our park regulations are written that require quite significant changes in terms of implementing a charging sort of mechanism of this type. It would require significant legislative change, and it would require quite a timely process, a long-term process in terms of that. For these reasons, we've chosen to use physical barriers to try and limit the amount of cut-through traffic within the park, and to implement car parking charging as a mechanism of trying to control that demand.
Right. A follow-up to that by Tim Pullen is, he says, while welcoming the efforts to reduce motor traffic, it's disappointing that one of the main routes between Kingston and Richmond gates has been left unaltered. This route is closed during rush hour in the winter after dusk without causing major problems. So why was a block not put in, for example, at Pembroke Lodge? You illustrated the three cuts of roads, the red roads. Why not the principal one between Kingston Gate and Richmond Gate?
I think, I mean, the three interventions that we've implemented as part of this trial are a great first step in significantly reducing cut-through traffic within the park. We're very aware of the impact any change within traffic movement within Richmond has on the wider community. And we're building on our first ever movement strategy in seeking to reduce the cut-through traffic in Richmond Park while maximising the benefit to park visitors. As I said, these three interventions are a great first step, as that they have effectively at weekends reduced traffic levels within 2/3 of the park. I think there needs to be in these first steps a balance between the benefit delivered to park visitors and the park itself, but equally as well balanced against the impact on the wider community in terms of that. I mean, we acknowledge that the project's likely to have knock-on effects in local neighbourhoods, and we believe that the trial project is a sort of fair compromise in the first instance, taking into account a range of factors and allowing us the opportunity to gather evidence and consultation around the impact of that.
Right, thank you. Can I just pick up, I know I'm breaking my own rules, but several people have asked in the questions, what about the difficulty of doing this assessment and the consultation and actually making any judgment on it when there is the COVID pandemic going on at the same time, which I think is a question a couple of people raised, and an important, interesting question to throw in.
I think
Chairman's privilege.
I think there's never a good time for change. There's never a good. I think we've found with COVID that within society, maybe perceptions, people are looking at things differently. I mean, we had always had these proposals, this implementation plan. This was part of the movement strategy. I think what we have with the current situation at the moment is we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to implement this. You've seen this across boroughs and across wider London. The movement from individuals to find alternative forms of transport, to use their green space in a slightly different way. I think, at this point, is there a better time maybe to championing the protection of public, open green space within parks and reducing the impact of motor vehicles? Is there a better time to be doing this?
Yeah, I think the question is, who knows what the future is going to look like, but is it, in a sense, can you make a fair judgment when things are so strange in the world we live in? But that I think that's the point people were trying to make. I'm not going to push it.
I think that there will always be challenges at any point when you implement any trial, and that's where consultation comes into its own in terms of people raising those particular concerns. Traffic levels, fluctuate during COVID. They're fluctuating now based on the tier level and how people are moving in terms of that. I think what has become clear, though, is the value that people put on green space. And the ability to access that. And I think, that this is a good opportunity to maximize the value of that space to local residents and to local stakeholders around Richmond. And I think part of doing that is reducing that impact of motor vehicles within that. But I agree. There's a challenge at any time that you implement something like this. And again, that's why the consultation process is in place and why we're engaging with individuals to try and build an evidence-based decisions.
Now, lots of people are piling in with comments and questions in the chat function. You gave on your PowerPoint slide very helpfully the email to consult for the consultation and the link to your website. Do you think either you or Matt or Simon could paste that into the chat section so that people who are to be honest, asking more questions than we're going to have time to respond to, or making more comments than we're going to have time to bring in, can actually then go direct to your website or to the response and make their responses there. So look, there we go.
I would
Matt,
have said I'd be surprised if Matt hasn't already done that.
Yes, he's on it.
Yeah,
great. So let's move away from through traffic and oh no, there's one more question on through traffic that was sent in advance. Matthew Rees says, I can see you can make an argument, although I don't necessarily agree with it, for journeys through the park during the week for workers, but why also is that allowed at weekend? Wouldn't it be good to have a different strategy for weekdays and weekend, is his question basically.
I mean, there is a difference between how we've managed traffic during weekdays and weekends. As indicated with the interventions, 2 of those are 7-day a week, 1 of those is weekend only. And from that point of view, we substantially reduced the volume of traffic moving from Richmond Gate to Roehampton at the weekend by closing that loop off. Again, as I said, it's a balance between allowing people to access the park. Even if they choose to come in a motor vehicle to access the car parks and access the park, we need to facilitate that. And it's slightly more complex, I think, to close the route between Richmond and Kingston without impacting on those access to those car parks and facilitating movement within that. As we said, these are the first steps in terms of our movement strategy. It's part of an implementation and a trial, and again, feedback is important around that. I think if 12 months ago we were talking about Richmond Park being 2/3 free of traffic, potentially cut through traffic on a weekend, that would be something that I think we would have been extremely pleased to achieve by this stage. I think the challenge often with processes such as this is we always want a little bit more. And I think sometimes it's for an organisation such as ourselves to balance the demands of the different user groups. And I think where we sit at the moment is a reasonable first step in that first instance, balancing the desire for people to access the park and facilitating that access via vehicle, but equally as well trying to maximise the benefit and enjoyment for the park for those individuals who don't want to see motor vehicles within it.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the car parking question. There are a series of these, and many of which are quite specific. So I don't know if you want to sort of tackle it more generally and then focus in on these, but you've already started to set out the thinking behind those charges. But Eileen Pessar makes the points. What about allowing the first hour of visits free of charges? Would it be possible to make sure you don't have to indicate how long you'll be in the park when you enter? And who manages the scheme? Would it be possible to have it managed by Royal Parks so that they get the benefit, the income, rather than private companies?
I mean, I think the feedback from Ellen in that instance is very positive, and that's just this. Sorry, that's my dog barking at the front door. That's just the sort of feedback. That's just the sort of feedback that we need in terms of that. It would be useful to receive that type of that feedback, and I'd encourage everyone to make a submission and fill in the survey to help us to do that. In terms of how we manage our car parks are managed through a car parking contractor within the central parks, but you can be assured that the lion's share of the profits associated with the management of those car parks comes through to TRP in that respect. So from that point of view, the money generated by those car parks, particularly in Richmond and Bushey, is there to support the maintenance of those parks in terms of the challenges that they face. But in terms of the suggestions such as that, there will always be people who have good suggestions, I think, in terms of that, and that would be something we would be very keen to encourage people to pass through to us.
Thank you. So here's a related but slightly different question. I'm afraid I cannot see the name of the person that submitted it, but you will recognize it if you're listening. Is there any process in place to stop car dumping while at work locally? For example, driving in at 8, paying for 6 hours, then transferring your car to another car park inside the park and paying for another 6 hours, thus using the park for cheap all-day parking.
I think it's always, I suppose, isn't it, a challenge with any facility that you provide, that there will be individuals who will choose to take advantage of that. I mean, at the moment, without car parking charges, it's possible for individuals to dump their cars within the park for the full 8 hours of the day in terms of that. 6 hours was felt by ourselves to be a fair period of time to allow people coming to the parks for the weekend to spend a good period of time within the park, meet with family, picnic, walk round. And again, I suppose it would be something that we would need to assess as we move forward through car parking charges to identify whether we see significant behavior of that type. I mean, it's usually relatively noticeable. You'll notice the car that parks in the same space every day from that point of view. I think, central parks, they're limited to 4 hours. I think that's more of a challenge we faced in the central parks. But then again, the pattern of our users at the weekends in Richmond and Bushey is that if you come by car, you tend to stay for a long time. So we really didn't want to impact on the family who've travelled and, who've come to the park, want to picnic, want to walk, want to spend a day there by limiting the amount of time that they were in the park. But I think that's a fair point, and that's something that I think it would be down to the Royal Parks to manage and identify and address those specific concerns as and when we identify them taking place.
So can I just pick up on that, going back to your presentation, that you talked about implementation and then monitoring. So how is this being monitored? Is monitoring taking place of, you just mentioned about the same car parking there every day, about how many people are using the car parks and how long they're staying?
There are traffic counts underway in terms of monitoring the number of vehicles moving through the parks, those that come, those that stop, those that move out. So there is information gathered in terms of that. Also, the local team, Simon's team, have a good understanding of a feel of when you would expect to see certain car parks busy. So you're able to identify patterns and changes in behaviour and parking within that. I mean, obviously, you know, there are car parks that are slightly more attractive to people who wish to dump their car for the day. You know, maybe the Kingston car park is slightly more attractive on that side of the town, side of the park for the hospital in that respect. But, you know, equally as well, it is something that we try and measure and monitor at the moment. But the mechanism to enforce that is currently, you know, lacking. You know, we might be able to identify somebody who's dumping a car in there for the day, but we're unable to sort of potentially do anything about it in terms of that. So it is also work that we're doing with the borough in terms of traffic movement and traffic flow to understand which vehicles are moving through our parks. But yes, as with any process or implementation of any sort of proposal, the monitoring and evolution of that program moving forward is incredibly important. So that is something that we would focus on.
Right. Here's another question that was submitted in advance, which is another sort of specific issue on the car parking charge. Could a refund system be implemented so that anyone spending money on the kiosks or Pembroke Lodge could be refunded? This way, this incentivizes people consuming local facilities. Yes, that'll do. Stop there.
I think that's not something that we would necessarily look at in the first instance, but again, through the consultation process, again, that's something that it would be useful to understand how strong the feeling is around that. There are challenges in terms of implementing that process, in terms of recouping the money and repaying back in terms of that. And likewise as well, you know, if one of our stated aims is to try and manage car parking demand, if we then refund that money back, that doesn't quite manage that sort of a process in terms of that. So that, again, that's something we would be interested to hear about in consultation. But as the proposal stands at the moment, I think it's more focused on a set fee for car parking for a set time in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Let's then look at the conflicting demands of cycling and cyclists. Eilish McKenna, who is commutes daily by bike as a nurse working in Hammersmith Hospital, says congestion in the morning at the approach to Roehampton Gate means it's difficult to get through on a bike because cars use both lanes. Can cyclists use the paths, or could we have a one-way flow system for cars at peak hours, leaving space for cyclists?
I think that the challenge with a one-way system within Richmond is the scale of the park. You know, we've all been trapped in one-way systems around the town centre where you come out of a junction 5 metres from where the one-way system starts. You have to do the whole loop round. And I think in that respect, I think Richmond is too big a park to implement that. I mean, cyclists can use the pedestrian gates. I know that gate in particular, there are pedestrian gates and footpaths either side of that. So there is the ability to move through those gates in terms of that. I mean, yeah, they are popular parks. The demand in terms of vehicle traffic is a challenge in relation to that. And it is a challenge for cyclists trying to move through in terms of that. But in terms of the specific answer to the question, in terms of the paths, there is the Tamsin Trail, which runs around the park, which is available for cyclists, which takes cyclists off the road. So from that point of view, there is a car-free route for cyclists within the park. And likewise, at the particular gates, there are pedestrian gates, which I know are accessible to cyclists. You may need to dismount to get through them, but they do provide an alternative way through if the actual gate itself is significantly congested.
Okay, thank you. Then there is another question on cycling, which is, have your plans taken into account the impact on cycling in the park? I've noticed, I haven't been able to follow the chat thread, but I noticed things popping up of the for and against cycling brigade. And the question that was asked in advance is, currently the roads are used by many as a cycling racetrack, making it hard for pedestrians. So is the plan, is the consultation also considering the effect on cycling in a positive and negative way?
I think it's very clear that when anything is implemented, there can be intended and unintended consequences. I think of any implementation in terms of that, and that's part of a trial process. That's part of understanding the implication of actions and how you react to those at a later date in terms of that. I mean, we you know, the vast majority of cycling within all of our parks is considerate. You know, we would very much encourage both cyclists, walkers and pedestrians and car drivers to sort of engage and, you know, at least, you know, try and coexist within the space. But I mean, as you've indicated there, intended and unintended consequences of a trial, and that's part of the trial process. If we identify through this implementation that we have challenges in other areas, be it in terms of the question previously about access through the gates, then that's something we potentially can look at in terms of that. And likewise as well in terms of how those cyclists are using the space, how that space works for them, what the removal of the cars. This is all relatively uncharted territory, I think, in terms of Richmond at the moment. And it's something that the more evidence that we can build around that to support that. There's a lot of thinking, you know, good work done out there in the wider, you know, London environment in terms of transport and cycling infrastructure and cycling integration. I think there's a lot to learn from that. We have been monitoring bicycle speeds, you know, we have been monitoring bicycle counts, and there are areas that are challenging for us in terms of that. And likewise, as we indicated, one of our key priorities behind the principles for the movement strategy was to prioritise walking within the park. So again, we're very clear that there are different user groups within the park, some of whom may feel more vulnerable in certain situations than others. And I think, you know, it's about collecting that evidence to support a reasoned decision and judgment about implementation or engagement if you choose to do so. And I think that's one of the areas where we are definitely collecting information, and we are receiving a significant amount of feedback on that at the moment. So I don't have any particular answers for that at the moment, but it is something that we are aware of and something we know we need to address. As you take the cars away from the road, other people use it for different ways. And I think it's about re-establishing a sort of considerate environment. And, you know, I would, you know, question, you know, some of the periods, you know, you see the Saturdays and you do see families on the roads, you see children cycling as well as people within Leica and stuff like that. And it's quite a polarizing argument, that one. And I'd like to say that we'd be able to work to some form of sort of compromise in terms of that.
Thank you. And then just going back to another question in advance, which I should have asked earlier on about through traffic, but it is, I think, again, reflected in some of the chat that I haven't been really reading. I'm not clear as a local resident, and I should be as chair of the Neighbourhood Forum, of the way in which you relate to the local councils. The question was, what consideration has been given to the impact of road closures in the park on traffic in surrounding roads? I'm sure consideration has been given, but how does that work in terms of the decisions that you take with relation to the park, but being outside the council's control, and the fact that the council has strategies for their road use and cycle use outside? How does that dialogue take place, or can it take place?
Okay, if you wouldn't mind if I refer that question to Matt, who as our head of transport is the person who will have the practical experience of that engagement with the local authority and will be able to give you a far more sort of comprehensive answer than I would. So if I can just pass over to Matt at this point.
Great, thank you.
Cool, yeah, I'll take that one. Thanks, Tom. So, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, you know, movement doesn't begin and end in our gates or outside of our gates. So, you know, we do need to work in collaboration and partnership with both the borough, TfL and everyone else to make this system work. And we are working with the borough, sharing our traffic data that we've collected in the park. They're ultimately going to share their traffic data with us as well, so we can build a complete picture of what's actually happening. To answer the question specifically though about, I guess, the decision-making power, I think that's what that's really coming back to. We are two independent authorities legally, but that's to say that we definitely, you know, have great conversations. We understand each other's needs and wants, and we need to make a collaborative decision about how this works. Otherwise, you know, like I said, we can't just blow up part of the neighborhood and for the benefit of one user. We need to make it really work collaboratively. That's a half answer.
So how practically, Matt, does it happen? Because consultation, you know, your consultation is going on, and that's your consultation. The council's not party to that. How does it practically work?
Well, I mean, I'm absolutely expecting a submission from the borough on what they feel our trials are being either successful or unsuccessful, or changes that they'd like to see. Equally, that they look to us for submissions on their work as well. So they put in a road closure or a low traffic neighbourhood somewhere. It has impacts on the park. So we need to work together on these things, and we do have a strong working relationship with the borough, as well as many of other stakeholders.
Right, thank you. One question that I missed earlier, which again is related to the whole question of the local neighbourhood and the use of the park, and parking and driving, is, has any thought, this is from Annette Cravioto, has any thought ever been given to a badge system so that people living locally, for example, a 3-mile radius, could use the park, and others are not? Or indeed, I suspect the same question could be asked with parking.
Again, that's something we will take through as part of the consultation. But I mean, the Royal Parks and our green spaces are there for everybody. I think as an organisation, we would probably be challenged by any scheme that prioritises one user group over another, be they local or further afield. That the strength of these spaces is that they appeal to such a wide demographic and a wide audience in that respect. I firmly believe that there is the opportunity that exists for balance between the needs of a local group, local stakeholders, and those individuals who travel slightly further afield because they don't have the facilities on their doorstep that some of the residents within Richmond enjoy in terms of access to park, in terms of that. So it's something we would consider under the consultation, but not, I think, any movement towards sort of membership that prioritizes one group over another is something that I don't think would necessarily fit within TRP's sort of ethos in terms of access to the park for all.
Right. So yeah, so you're essentially saying this is a resource not just for Kingston and Richmond. It's one
would suggest that it is a resource that local residents and stakeholders will make full use of, and I think they're incredibly lucky to have that on their doorstep. It's the largest urban park effectively in the country, and as that said, with that in mind, it has a significant draw. But equally as well, I would want individuals who don't have access to those facilities, maybe where they are, and in London that can sort of be 3, 4, 5, 6 miles, whereas it's not far in terms of geography, but still have that access to the park and the ability to enjoy it, particularly if they're making a particular trip to come to that. So I think it's about ensuring that we have a system in place that's fair for all, rather than maybe trying to prioritize one group over another. As a local resident, you're able to access the park probably at times that people who travel from further away aren't, because of the very geography and your proximity to the park. So there are probably opportunities for locals to enjoy the park. I know when I visit Richmond, I always get there really early in the morning, and that window between sort of 6:30 and 8 o'clock, can be a wonderful time to spend in the park. And that's something which one would expect maybe locals to have better access to than others. So from that point of view, I think we would prefer to avoid anything that prioritizes one group over another.
Right.
It's very, very difficult, Simon, for me to understand whether I've answered your question correctly or not sometimes, because I know you're reading.
Well, I'm trying to pass on somebody else's question.
I know. Yeah.
So I'm trying to make sure that I'm not missing people out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of these they overlap, and so you are answering them, even though it's not a specific issue that I'm bringing up. Right. So the installation of donation meter. This is a question asked in advance by Andrew Barnard. The installation of donation meters is only a first step in deploying the infrastructure to implement a parking charge. What funds can you tell? I mean, I don't know, maybe too early, but what funds have been generated what investment has been made to promote it and to encourage visitors to contribute funds? Has a serious effect been made to ramp up voluntary contributions? And somebody else asked a similar question: why have voluntary collection boxes and notices of a time limit given up to give a chance for hard-up families and pensioners for some distance? I mean, can you basically give a justification for voluntary against?
I mean, we have, as you'll have seen, sort of in the last 12 months or so, voluntary donation boxes were installed into a number of the car parks, both in Richmond and Bushey, which provide individuals with the opportunity to donate money in lieu of parking fees, because parking fees weren't applicable at that time. So there does exist that facility within the park. And you know, whereas that's not generating a large amount of money, I know that Simon and the team are very grateful for sort of every penny that they get through that. Alongside a number of other organisations, the Royal Parks are proactively looking at this stage, particularly in the post-COVID financial challenges, around the ability to donate within parks, so tap and donate facilities. But I mean, those tend to work primarily where we have them in some of the central parks, in areas of particular interests, so where the individual user is able to see a clear correlation between the value of what they're experiencing and their need to donate. So if we use the Diana Princess of Wales Memorial Playground as an example, that's a location where donation boxes work very well, because from that point, the individual who's in there, you know, their experience is very positive. So they don't tend to work quite so well located out within the wider environment. And I think that's a challenge with a lot of our parks, monetizing that value that somebody might feel in coming to the park. You know, what's it worth to them to see the rut? What's it worth to them to be able to cycle a lap around Richmond Park in terms of that? It's difficult to monetize that. It's difficult to find a way to encourage people to make that donation. And catering is a way to generate some income from that. Same way car parking charges are a way to try and monetize some of that sort of the desire for people to visit the park for reinvestment back into the park.
So one of the questions that is coming up is to what extent some people are getting the impression that this is not, that this consultation is a consultation in name only, because you seem to be coming with a set of presuppositions about where this should be going. So to what extent is the movement strategy actually decided and the direction of travel that will definitely take place? And to what extent is there still scope for everything to change and revert and not actually carry on, even as it has been going?
I mean, it's, as I said earlier, the final decision-making process is the board of trustees for the Royal Parks. It's not my decision or Matt's decision or Simon's decision about what gets implemented within the parks. We're part of the process. And, you know, I would genuinely suggest, based on the, you know, that the flow of conversation tonight, the feedback we've had around consultation, that Richmond is very much wide open in that respect. You know, there are views on both sides of the argument. You know, there are views very much in favour of removing, as I said earlier on, you know, removing all cars from Richmond Park, but likewise as well, very much views in favour of retaining some vehicle traffic through Richmond Park. So in that respect, I would definitely say Richmond is probably one of the most wide, well, if not the widest open of our consultations. One might suggest, you know, not predetermining the result for somewhere like Greenwich, but where you have a section of road there that was open traditionally for 2 hours in the morning rush hour, 2 hours in the evening rush hour. You know, from that point of view, you know, the benefits to the park of reducing traffic during those times far outweigh, you know, the potential benefits to those commuters cutting through. But Richmond is a very, as we said, a very complex beast in terms of that. And I think all we're trying to do in this first instance is take those first steps in this direction, acknowledging that something needs to be done. The principles were widely supported in terms of that, and trying to make a movement in that direction, but still very much taking on board the views of consultation. But again, bearing in mind that, you know, at the end of the day, although, you know, consultation has a purpose and a point, but that's to sort of gather views and opinions, and it's not a vote. We're not able to take every single individual consultation into mind in that respect. It's about, you know, massive views, isn't it, in terms of responding to that mass. And I think that's where we're very clearly seeing with Richmond that it's a park that engenders very strong feelings, and there are views on both sides of the argument. So from that point of view, yeah, if you'd asked me 12 months ago, would we be at this stage now in terms of movement strategy and implementation, I'd have been very surprised to see where we are at the moment, just in terms of what we've managed to achieve and the benefits that's delivered to the park. So, but equally as well, you know, it's still a consultation process. It's still an implementation. It's still a trial. There's engagement with the local authority. There's impact on wider roads. There's impact on different user groups, all of which will play a part in our final decision.
And same question with regard to the car parking charge question. To what extent is that we need to do this, we are going to do this, and the question is how we do that, or to what extent is a question of shall we do this or shall we not do this?
I think this is about how we proceed with this process. I think it's you know, as we've indicated there, the rationale behind car parking, managing demand, encouraging sustainable transport, generating, you know, providing funds to maintain the park. All of those are very strong arguments, you know, in terms of supporting of that. But again, though, it's about consultation in terms of how we deliver that, how we provide a service in that respect that takes account of the views of the stakeholders, but equally as well takes account of some of the real challenges that the park is facing at the moment as well.
So what I think you said there was that charges will be implemented. It's just a question of how, and yeah, is that right? Because that brings, I'm not criticizing you for that or applauding you for that. I'm just trying to clarify, because that brings it in line with other parks within the Royal Parks, and also because it works towards achieving the ends that you as an organization see are laudable and good. Is that right?
I don't think we'd have stepped down the route of a consultation if we weren't interested in the views of our stakeholders and our stakeholder groups in terms of that. As you've indicated, you know, we are in the country is in a very different position to where it was 12 months ago. In terms of that, there are external pressures that play on any organisation now. But again, you know, it's about a consultation that allows us, if we do get down the route of implementation, to implement something that at least addresses some of the concerns raised by residents. And it's about how we implement, and if we implement, and how we can do so in a way that takes on board the evidence of the consultation.
Right. Thank you. Some of the questions that have come in the chat are about specific closures or reductions, and it addresses this question. This might be one you want to throw, just offering you the chance to throw it back at Matt, but what the priority is, what the principal aim is in the movement strategy. I mean, for example, somebody said, would you consider closing the Richmond Park to all vehicles every Sunday? So it's much more of a non-through route for anyone at all. Or what about closing to traffic during rush hours, 7:30 to 9:30, 4:30 to 6:30? And of course, this is going back to your question of who's it for. You know, is the park there to aid the transport network as it has done and sometimes has had to do, or is it primarily for enjoyment of those using the green space? And how do you weigh those two up, because they're two different and competing demands?
I mean, I've worked in park management now since the mid-90s, and a lot of what we do is about compromise. It's about, you have a space that a lot of people want to use for a lot of different purposes. And with that in mind, it's about finding the solution that delivers the greatest benefit to all, but without negatively impacting on a large proportion. Ultimately, you're talking about a national nature reserve, aren't you? You're talking about a triple SI. You're talking about one of the unique sites in the United Kingdom, particularly within its urban situation. There are very few other places like Richmond Park. And Royal Park's one of our key, charitable objectives is to conserve and protect the park. At the end of the day, our duty is to do that. But likewise as well, another one of our charitable objectives is to support and engage with the visitor. So from that point of view, it's balancing those two, what can often be quite challenging, demands, the desire to protect and conserve a space. Look at the biodiversity loss. Richmond Park, we fundamentally need to see an increase in the resilience of that landscape from a biodiversity point of view moving forward if we're to sustain it in any form moving forwards. But that is challenged by visitor numbers, by vehicle traffic, by litter, by climate change. And again, it's but equally as well, how valuable is a park that people can't use? So I think you might have to bring me back to your original question again, Simon, but it's very much about balancing that compromise. And there are arguments on both sides. Primarily, our duty is to protect the park and service the visitor. And if protecting the park and servicing the visitor means that we reduce commuter through traffic for those individuals who drive through without stopping, and from their point of view are not benefiting from the park other than a cut-through route, then realistically, I think we have to go down on the side of the visitor and the park. But likewise as well, we can't do that without necessarily impacting on the surrounding roads, quality of life. And that's where the engagement with the local authority, and that's where I genuinely feel, yes, we could have done more. Yes, we could have done less. But I think the fact that we're doing something is a good first step. And I think the strength of the consultation you've got here and the views that your people are presenting here is very much an indication of how important this space is to people. And I think with that in mind, it's our duty to try and come up with a solution that, protects and conserves, but also tries to sort of balance that against the needs of the people who live around it or come further away to use it.
Can you tell me, I'm asking my own question now, again, which is just picking up on that point. Have you seen over recent years, trying to leave aside COVID, which has obviously changed everything, but have you seen an increase in visitor numbers to the park, or in through traffic, or in litter? Are these issues that, if COVID had never happened, you would be very concerned about?
I think one of the statistics for proposed population growth in London for the next sort of 10 years or so, is it sort of 10 million or so, I think, or something? I don't know. I'd be interested if anyone could name a substantial urban park development other than Olympic Park in the last 15 years. We're building more and more in terms of housing and accommodation. Green space lags very much behind that, which obviously leads to increased pressures on the space that we have. We've seen the benefits, and COVID has very much highlighted the benefits that green space provide for people. And the demand on that has increased. As I said, who would not want to be in Richmond Park at 7 o'clock on a spring morning? Or 4:30 on a winter's evening when the clouds coming down, the mist is there, and you can, who would not want to do that? But these landscapes have a capacity, I think, and it's about how we manage that capacity, what we can do to try and encourage people to use particular areas or to take particular routes, or focus on, catering works like that to a certain extent as well, doesn't it? You hold people in a certain area, you protect maybe some of the wider park in terms of that. But I think very much we are seeing, it's only to be expected, a significant increase in visitor use across all of our parks, which is placing pressure on those spaces, both from a biodiversity point of view, a horticultural point of view, a conservation point of view, and a financial point of view.
Right.
Simon would be able to, support this, but the volume of litter seen this year within all of our parks is significantly greater than we've seen in any previous year. Yep, okay, that's maybe COVID, but that pattern, that is only climbing. So from that point of view, we are at the point where we need to be making some decisions about how we manage the park going forward, and biodiversity is one of those as well. The resilience that we need to build into these landscapes to sustain them moving forward, I think is, it is somewhere where we primarily need to focus, I think, in terms of that. And if we can protect and conserve the landscape by taking out some of those inputs which stress it, or at least moderating them, or trying to control them, or limit them, or manage them, then I think that's beneficial in the longer run. I mean, what would, yeah.
I think it's helpful for people to hear, helpful me, but people to hear your broader thinking that, we get a bit bogged down in, I want, because I live here, to think of this as my problem, whether I go through that road or not, and to put it in that broader context is very helpful.
But what is a landscape without people to use it?
Yeah.
As Matt will have seen, that the watching the child learn to cycle on one of the closed roads recently, or something like that, that experience that individual has at that age will potentially stay with them their whole life. And that's what these green spaces are able to do. They're able to provide those unique memories and experience. And, I think, I don't know, but in conversations, I have with people, people's strongest memories maybe tend to be those that are triggered around their times within green space to a certain extent. I mean, that's completely anecdotal on my part and just based on my evidence, but they are such important spaces to people that we're bound to see greater pressure on them. But then again, that's even more of a responsibility on us to try and protect them and conserve them.
Can I ask, in the light of some of the questions that have come in on the chat, about your relationship with TfL, because that's another issue. Most of the gates have no bus routes to them, and we don't want people to use their cars more. Some people are not in a position to cycle. So are there discussions with TfL about access to the park via the different park gates?
I mean, if we look at the central parks, we have numerous examples within the central parks or where TRP have partnered with TfL to deliver new walking routes, new cycling routes, cycle superhighways, pedestrian routes, new. And very much, I think TfL's focus maybe has been on those central areas. I think we have a history of working with them to deliver what's best for our visitors. Again, from the principles of the movement strategy about sustainable transport and access, and that is definitely an area that we would be more than keen to work with TfL in terms of ensuring, sort of supporting them in how they might well support visitors travelling to the park in a way other than cars. Public transport at the end of the day is one of the most sustainable transport solutions in terms of that. And as I said, within the central parks, we've had the opportunity, and TfL have had the funding to work with us on that. We've not necessarily seen that to such an extent in the outer parks, but if we were to see that, we would wholeheartedly support them, I think, with that.
Is that something that's sorry, I just picking on him, but is that not something in Matt's job description?
Matt has relationships with TfL. We are talking to TfL now about funding that's becoming available, I think, as part of COVID in terms of that. So that is something we are talking to them about. But equally as well, we are one stakeholder. Policy is driven by central government. Policy and focus is on areas. There's reasons why certain areas are focused and prioritised. It's for us to make a case in that respect, to be an advocate for green space and for the parks and for public access to them. So yes, that's definitely a role in terms of what we do, and that is part of Matt's role. But then equally, it's my role, it's Simon's role, whenever we're talking to anyone within government or local authority or within our wider stakeholders about the importance of green space and how people access them is part of allowing people to enjoy that.
Yeah. You have talked quite a lot about not wanting to favour particular groups over others, but presumably you don't want to disadvantage the disabled and the elderly. And one of the comments that have been put forward, or a couple of the comments have been put forward in the chat, are elderly people can't walk or cycle to the park, but car parking charges penalise them like others, and Ham is one of the most deprived areas of the borough of Richmond, and certainly of the constituency as well. Similarly, disabled people will rely on someone driving them to the park and wanting to drive there. So is there any way in which you don't have a one-size-fits-all solution to reducing traffic?
I mean, again, I think we very much appreciated that for a number of our visitors, the car is the means that they use to access the parks, which is why we haven't closed any car parks, which is why we haven't shut the whole park to traffic. You know, we're still very keen that those people for whom a car is the only option are able to key to access. And from that point of view, access is the key there for people, not through traffic. So from that point of view, blue badge holders will remain free within the car parks. And realistically, it's yeah. I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I mean, the prices for the car parking aren't disproportionate. You know, that they're not excessive in terms of I think what other organisations charge in terms of that. I think they're relatively fair. And there, as we said, from 9 till 6, there will be opportunities for people to access the park outside of those hours at particular times of year. You know, we have particular disabled access car parks. Isabella car park is blue badge only from that point of view. So from that point of view, it's that balance between facilitating and permitting access from as wide a range of our visitors as possible, but doing so in a way that's sustainable and doesn't necessarily negatively impact on other visitors in that respect, which is why, as we said, you know, we've made no reduction in terms of car parking space. We've not shut any car parks. We've not restricted access in that respect, which is why, you know, the question around Richmond Gate to Kingston Gate, you know, a lot of the rationale behind that is access to Pembroke Lodge, access to those car parks. So again, it's about striking that balance between the two. And
yeah, with the movement strategy in particular, in this locality, the Petersham Road is a common problem in that I've only lived in this area 16 years, but I gather years ago there was a sinkhole opened up that just closed the whole thing. Regularly there are roadworks which slow the whole thing down, and it's such an important artery. So does the movement strategy take on board the fact that it is this key artery which is often under severe pressure, and that the park has been used in the past as the only alternative through route for traffic to get through?
I mean, I think this is where engagement with local authority is important in terms of that, isn't it? And understanding the impact of works on that particular route. I mean, I understand that, you know, this particular area is not well served in terms of main arterial routes, is it? From that point of view, you know, that is a challenge that realistically is not of the park's making. And there are periods of the year during the winter when we shut the gates at 4 that we operate with, you know, no access through in that respect. I think what we're trying to do here is to come up with a proposal that protects and maintains some of those intrinsic qualities of the park by limiting and restricting vehicle traffic. I think that's a challenge, as you've indicated, in this area, because public transport is maybe not as well developed as it is elsewhere in London. And as you've indicated there, you know, one main arterial road is subject to, you know, the challenges with that. And again, as I said, I think engagement with local authority, trying to understand their future plans for traffic movement. But realistically, you know, are the park roads here for commuter traffic, or are the park roads here to facilitate access to the space? You know, access for visitors. There's a balance between the two, and I personally feel that we've got that right in this instance. But again, you know, implementation and trial continues beyond, you know, implementation point in terms of that. So I think it's something we would continue to look at. But I think, as you indicated earlier, I think what we should be focusing on is maybe working with TfL to increase those alternative transport links in this area as well, and supporting and advocating through that, rather than maybe reliance on you know, one particular road and alternatives to it. But I'm not a transport planner, I'm a parks aficionado.
Oh, I get Matt onto that straight away, I think, is the answer.
Yeah.
At weekends, this is another question that's been put in. At weekends, residents of Roehampton can't drive to Pembroke Lodge. Conversely, those to the west can't reach Pen Ponds without major diversions. How can this be right?
I mean, the short answer is they can. They just involve a slightly longer journey, but they still have access to the park. They still have access to 4,000 acres of wonderful green space. They might not have access to the bit that they've used or the bit that they particularly want to in terms of that, but they still have access to a part of the park. They can drive around if they choose to do so. And again, if we're going to implement some change, there will be winners and losers in that respect. And it's again about maybe the benefits for all outweigh the negative impact on a number. I'm not suggesting in any way that the negative impact felt by that individual is any less worth than the positives that we've seen elsewhere. But the management of our type of society is all about trying to balance. And we're not restricting access at any point. It's not maybe as easy as it was before, but access to the park remains open, and I think those people who are going to Pembroke Lodge are going to enjoy green open space. Green open space is still accessible to them in Richmond Park.
Right. And a couple of people have suggested, and I'm sure you have considered this in the past, but it'd be interesting to hear why it hasn't gone any further. What about a toll on the roads in the park rather than charging in the car parks? And that could then also be varied for people who are driving less polluting vehicles, so electric and hybrid vehicles rather than petrol or diesel. Was that considered as an option? I mean, and that would obviously be something that could be true of all royal parks, not just our own.
I think yeah. I mean, there's a number of challenges. I mean, the royal parks regulations are a relatively archaic set of regulations in certain areas, and in that respect, there are challenges in terms of road tolls and our ability to enforce and implement those, and where the income from those goes, which is effectively back to the enforcement agency from that point of view. So in that type of instance, there wouldn't be a direct correlation between any income generated. That's not, the main factor behind it if we're talking about reducing traffic, but as a byproduct, any income generated from that would not then be available to pay back into the parks. And again, this is as much about trying to control and restrict, limit access. I mean, you look at congestion charge in central London, that's taken a significant hike to 7 days a week to realistically have a significant impact on transport and traffic levels in that area. And I think road tolls become an additional cost that people are prepared to bear, whereas what we're trying to do is trying to reduce the volume of that traffic. And I think in that respect, sort of, car parking charges, managing demand, closing roads is a more sustainable way of doing that than road tolling in that respect, which would have some significant technical issues for us and some legislative issues in that respect. And, if we're trying to get cars out, whether they've paid to come in or not, whether they're cutting through, if they're cutting through, whether they've paid or not, they're still cutting through. And what we're trying to do is to try and reduce that cut through, improve the ambience of the park, the environment of the park for everybody, acknowledge that people need to use vehicles to access the car parks, but again, trying to manage that demand in that area there.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm looking at two questions and wondering which one to go with. So the question is, well, let's go with the technical one first, which I overlooked earlier. Don't your new restrictions conflict with the 1872 Act of Parliament, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which secured the public from molestation and annoyance while enjoying royal parks, gardens and possessions?
Okay. We see no inherent conflict with that act. The parks continue to remain open and free at the point of entry. We're not in any way advocating any form of charge to entry to the park. Parks only really close sort of during the DIRCO, which is for safety reasons. So for the majority of the year, access is maintained. And I think those regulations were more designed around the management of the behaviour of individuals within the park, and less so about how they travel or move within it. You know, from that point of view, access is still available to the park. So we've seen no sort of inherent conflict with that Act of Parliament in that respect.
Of course, you'll have people writing to you saying, well, I'm annoyed when I can't do this on a Sunday, so it's caused me annoyance. Yes, let's not go there. Somebody asked the question, which I think it comes back to the heart of a lot of what we've been talking about. Why do you not consider the roads in Richmond Park to be part of the local road network, which is how local people currently see them and use them?
I mean, these roads are privately owned and managed. You know, they're privately owned and managed by the Royal Parks. They're primarily created for the purpose of access to the park. It's an accident, I think, of fortune that they've become cut-through routes. They've been, you know, primary focus, we feel, for those access routes to the park is to access and enjoy the park. An individual who's cutting through the park in that respect is not benefiting from the park in any other way than shortening their journey. In doing so, they are potentially impacting on a significant number of people's enjoyment, the flora and fauna of a SSSI site. And so from that point of view, you know, they weren't, I don't believe that they were originally designed in terms of, you know, cut through routes. Access to the park is probably what they were originally designed for, and that's how we would like to bring them back. But that said, you know, we're still recognising the impact on the local community, which is why we retain that one route from Richmond Gate to Kingston. You know, so we are still aware of the role that they play. I think it's about trying to get that balance between, you know, 85% of the traffic that drives through the park doesn't stop. You know, what's the benefit to the park and other park visitors of that 85%? There isn't, you know, from that point of view. So, you know, when you've got statistics such as that, you know, 85% of people are using those roads as a route to get from A to B. I think you really have to try and, you know, understand the benefit to park users and the environment of the park that you would get from restricting that access.
Well, I think that we will call it a day there. It's 2028, and I want 2 minutes to say a huge thank you to you. I feel that I thought you were going to divvy the questions out between yourself and Matt and Simon, but you have answered question after question. You've taken all the things I've thrown at you, which I just hasten to add, primarily from other local people. So thank you, Tom, ever so much for giving up your evening and being willing to take all this on board. And I'm sure you've said it already, we should really encourage people to make their views known in the consultation. Do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, I mean, Simon, I would be naive to expect to have answered everybody's questions in a way that satisfies them in that respect. You know, I've had a snapshot of time to respond to some of the questions you've asked me, and I'm sure that, you know, some of the answers I've given haven't been suitable, or, you know, so again, you know, that consultation process is there for people to take the time to write in, to comment with us about that. You know, fundamentally, you know, I'm an individual who loves parks. You know, Richmond Park is an incredible resource that we're all incredibly lucky to have in this part of London. And I think from that point of view, you know, it's about protecting that park, improving the environment of that park, but balancing that against the real need of the visitors. But as I said, you know, if I've not answered a question correctly, or people still have challenge in terms of that, then please use that consultation process, you know, to get through in terms of that. And potentially, yes, I should probably have used Matt and Simon slightly more, but I do like to talk about parks, and I apologise if I've monopolised the conversation in that respect. But I would genuinely, again, you know, the strength of feeling that people have about this issue, I think, is just really reflective of the importance of these parks to the local community. And I would suggest very much that's why the consultation process exists, to allow people that ability to contribute in terms of this process, which, as I said earlier, remains wide open for Richmond.
Can I apologise to anyone who wanted to ask a question and typed in a question or sent in a question and I didn't do it justice, or I didn't get round to asking it, but I hope that the questions that have been asked have helped you to understand the issues and to get a a much clearer picture of where the park is coming from, where the royal parks are coming from, and the strategy that they're taking, but also your opportunity to have your say. So Matt, could you just pop up on chat again the link that takes people to how they join in, just so that, because it was a long way up the screen. And can I once again thank the North Kingston Forum Chair, Di Watling, who organised the Zoom, and Councillor Andre Fries, who made it all happen and publicised it, and every single one of you who has taken part this evening, whether by writing in, joining in the chat, or just by taking part. I think the number that have joined in is quite remarkable and a real reflection of our passion about these parks. Do continue to get involved with your neighbourhood forum.